my example of that is a live actual example, and it involved myself and a Singaporean private equity group and a Indonesian counterparty and a zircon-based project in Kalimantan. So what happened? And the Singaporean group that went through this proposed transaction here in the room, and they don't mind the discussion, they met an Indonesian counterparty who had a gold and zircon project, and we'll discuss that. We'll discuss that later. A gold and zircon project, which is a type of project called a mineral sands project in the Palangkaraya region in Kalimantan. And they did an amount of legal due diligence and an amount of commercial due diligence and concluded that they wanted to conduct a transaction. The transaction, the deal, was for the Singaporean group to acquire a controlling stake for a sum of money and then capitalise the company with a larger sum of money, a further sum of money, and the Indonesian counterparty would have a free carried share of the project, and then the project development would proceed. Legal due diligence was complete and all came up fine. I mean, yes, the Indonesian counterparty did own the tenement. It was in a normal standard PT company, and then the commercial due diligence had started, and the Singaporean company had been formed. The ownership to the Indonesian company had been established. A PMA for the takeover had been established in Indonesia. So, everything was progressing. And then the Singaporean group asked me to check. So what I did is I did what you do in technical due diligence. I went to site and started sniffing around. So as a mining engineer and with a Indonesian geologist who was with us, we went to site and we started to look at everything at the concession area to see that it matched up, to see that everything that we'd been told was correct. Well, zircon and gold. Zircon itself is a heavy mineral sand. It's found in sands, and those sands generally occur in flat, tabular-style deposits, and they are a compressed, compacted sand. Mineral assets are a combination of tons and grade. That's what forms the mineral asset project. Now, there weren't JORC resources at this particular project. There were only grab samples. So a grab sample is where you have an area and you take one point, you take one handful of sand out of that area, and you say, I'm going to do lab analysis on this, and I'm going to check the concentration of material in that. Well, what we were expecting is we were expecting a large area to contain 3% zircon and 1 gram per tonne gold. When I went to site, I said that as a mining person, I would like to know what the grade of dirt, what the grade of resource is that's going to actually be mined and put through a processing plant, put through a processing facility. So what I did is, instead of taking one handful of dirt from one particular place, and they'd done 50 grab samples from 50 different places, but instead of taking a handful, I took a section of the mineable horizon. So I said, look, I'm going to take a handful of the entire batch of sand, because when we come along with an excavator and dig, we're going to use the excavator to dig the entire thickness of sand. Now, the concentration that came back was 100 times less. So I said to the Singaporean private equity group, I said, look, my initial due diligence is I would not invest, and this is the reason. So obviously there was a second round of technical due diligence, given how much work had been done already, and they said, look, go back to site, check it out again, And what we'll do is we'll send a team of Indonesian geologists and field assistants with you, and they can do lots of sampling. So what happened was a team of us went back to site, and we dug a few trenches just by hand and with some local materials. We dug a few trenches. We opened up a lot of quite a few little areas there. And what started happening was we started sampling a representative area of the entire mineable horizon, and there was a disparity between the way I was sampling and between the way the project proponent company people were sampling. We were both taking the dirt out of the ground the same way. So we would approach the heavy mineral sands, the sand horizon, and we would take, you know, a 5 kilo, 10 kilo bag of dirt out that was representative all the way down. We were both doing that. But then what I was doing is I was bagging that sand and saying, that's the sample, I'm sending that to the lab, because when I come along with a digger, an excavator, and I dig all this out, that's what I'm going to be digging out. What the other guys were doing is they were getting that 5 kilo, 10 kilo sample, and they were washing it. They were washing it and getting all the light stuff off and leaving the heavy stuff in. So their grades were coming back more concentrated than my grades. So when this was raised as an issue, the Indonesian project vendors, project proponents said, yeah, but guys, look, we're going to end up washing it, right? So we're going to end up washing it, so we might as well find out what it is washed. To which, I acknowledge that. Yes, we are going to end up washing it, but there's not going to be people walking around the mining project with gold pans washing buckets of dirt. We're going to put it all into a big processing plant with a series of jigs and a series of gravity separation spirals, physical separation by water, and we're going to wash it all in there. I want to know what the grade of that dirt is in total coming out of a processing plant in total. That's what I want to know.
Once again, we don't all have the opportunity to go down and test the core samples ourselves. What would be a signpost, for example, can I suggest the company playing on the ignorance of investors between reserves, resources, and the various subcategories of that could be the point of exploitation?
Yes, reserves and resources. Also the classification of reserves and resources. Also how they've been calculated. And also the way the groundwork studies have been done. So coming back to your example on Poseidon and Bre-X was fraud. So Bre-X was sample salting. Bre-X was a small group of people undertaking an absolute illegal activity. And they were obviously eventually found out. So how they were eventually found out in Bre-X, if you don't mind? How they were eventually found out in Bre-X is, obviously Bre-X is a small Canadian company, small by personnel standards, 30, 40 people. Market cap went up to Canadian 6 billion based on one project, based on Busang in Kalimantan, but a small company. Bre-X was never going to develop that property. So what happened was a development strategy was put together for that property, and a transaction was proposed. It was the mid-90s. Suharto was in power in Indonesia, so the Suharto family formed part of that transaction, and the transaction was proposed and due diligence started. The transaction was Freeport-McMoran, an already operating company in Indonesia. A very large company would take 45% of the project. Private Indonesian interests, the family, Suharto family, would take 10% of the project, and Bre-X would have 45% of the project as well. So Freeport's initial due diligence was to go to site and drill all their own holes, with all their own people, all their own equipment, with no involvement from anyone else at all. When they did that, they found no gold, or not enough gold to make it worthwhile developing. So, and of course that was the beginning of the end for Bre-X, which ended up resulting in one of the geologists unfortunately falling out of a helicopter.
Was he pushed?
So that being fraud, was very, very different and was always going to be discovered versus the other example you spoke about, Mark, being the Poseidon bubble in Australia. Poseidon wasn't fraud. Poseidon was very, very careful release of specific information without necessarily other information being released. I'll explain. And this is what investors can look for in all investors, retail investors, sophisticated investors, fund investors, and corporates can look for in technical documentation.